Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it quietly, like it was a scheduling update, not a decision about my body. Don't touch me during the holidays. I stood there with my coat still on, December cold leaking in through the door, and nodded like she'd asked me to pick up milk. Inside, something locked. Not broke. Locked. We were already halfway through December by then. Lights were up, calendars full, and everything between us had been reduced to logistics. She moved through the house with her phone in hand, checking times, approving access, managing moods the same way she managed people at the office. I'd built the company from nothing, learned to solve problems with my hands and numbers, but at home, I'd become something else. Convenient, predictable, easy to postpone. That weekend we did our usual run to Sam's Club. Big cart, bulk food, holiday nonsense we'd barely touch. We looked like a couple from the outside. No one could see that we didn't walk close anymore, that she angled her body away from mine in every aisle. At checkout, she laughed at something on her screen, a short laugh I hadn't heard in weeks. I didn't ask who she was texting. I already knew it wasn't me. At night, Disney Plus played in the background while she lit one of those candles she liked, trying to manufacture warmth. We sat on opposite ends of the couch. No arguing. No shouting. Just space. She said she was tired. She said January would be better. I believed her because believing was easier than seeing what was happening right in front of me. The thing about running a construction business is you learn patterns, delays, shortcuts, when someone starts working around you instead of with you. I noticed how often she stayed late at the office. How often my foreman's name came up in casual conversation, always paired with praise, always unnecessary. I noticed because noticing is what I do. A few days before Christmas, I sat alone in my Chevy Silverado, engine running, watching the house lights glow through the windshield. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. I felt clear, like something had finally been named. She thought the holidays were a pause, a harmless freeze. I understood then they were a test. And I decided I wouldn't beg for warmth from someone who'd already chosen where to spend it. The first real shift didn't come from her. It came from someone who had no reason to lie to me. It was the Tuesday before Christmas, gray morning, cold enough that breath hung in the air at the job site. I was walking the perimeter, boots crunching over frozen gravel, when one of my guys hesitated before speaking. He wasn't dramatic, just uncomfortable. He asked, carefully, whether I'd changed the holiday schedule on purpose. I told him no. He nodded, then mentioned that my foreman had been leaving early most afternoons. Said he was handling office coordination. That phrase didn't belong on a construction site. It belonged inside my house. I didn't react. I never do in public. I thanked him and kept walking, but my mind slowed down the way it does before a storm. Office coordination meant my wife. It meant doors closed and calendars synced. It meant proximity that didn't require effort. Later that day, I stopped by the office unannounced. Not to check, just to observe. She was at her desk, headset on, coffee beside her keyboard. She didn't see me at first. She was smiling at her screen, the kind of relaxed smile she used to save for weekends. When she noticed me, the smile vanished, replaced by efficiency. She asked if I needed something. I said no and walked past her. At lunch, I drove through Chick-fil-A and sat alone in the truck, engine off, watching people come and go with wrapped boxes and red cups. She didn't text. She hadn't texted me during the workday in weeks. I thought about how often she'd said she was too busy to answer calls, too tired to explain, too overwhelmed for closeness. And yet somehow, someone else had access. That night, she came home late. Said there was end-of-year cleanup. She lit another candle, one of those Bath and Body Works scents meant to feel like comfort. I watched her move through the kitchen, careful not to touch me, careful not to invite questions. She talked about deadlines, about stress, about how January would reset everything. I listened. I always listened. But something inside me had already turned inward. Not anger. Calculation. I started replaying small moments I'd ignored. Laughter that didn't include me. Names mentioned too often. The way she guarded her phone like it held oxygen. I went to bed without touching her. She didn't notice. That was the moment I understood this wasn't new. It was just finally visible. I didn't go looking for proof right away. Proof changes things, and I wasn't ready to change anything yet. Silence was still useful. Observation even more. It started small, the way structural failures always do. A payroll discrepancy that didn't make sense. Overtime approved on days the site wrapped early. Fuel charges logged when the truck hadn't moved. Numbers don't lie, but they do point. I followed the trail the same way I would with a cost overrun, calm and methodical, no emotion attached. At home, nothing changed on the surface. She still moved through the evenings with practiced distance, still claimed exhaustion, still curled up on her side of the couch, while Disney Plus played to no one in particular. She burned through candles faster than usual, like scent could replace presence. I let her believe everything was normal because normal made people careless. One night, she fell asleep with her phone on the kitchen counter. That never happened. Not once in years. I didn't rush. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, then picked it up like it was just another object in the house that belonged to me. I didn't read messages. I didn't need to. Calendar invites told me enough. Overlapping meetings that weren't on the company schedule. Field check-ins that happened off-site. Repeating time slots that matched his pattern, not hers. I put the phone back exactly where it had been. The next day, I checked access logs at the office. Keycard entries after hours. 2 names. Same nights. Same gap between entry and exit. Long enough to matter. At lunch I sat in my car, same spot as before, Chick-fil-A bag untouched on the passenger seat. I wasn't angry. That was the part that surprised me most. Anger clouds judgment. What I felt was distance growing inside my chest, like a controlled burn clearing space. When I got home, she asked if I was quiet because I was stressed. I told her work was busy. That answer satisfied her. It always had. She didn't ask follow-up questions. She never did with me. Later, as she slept, I stared at the ceiling and realized something important. She hadn't just moved away from me physically. She'd reassigned intimacy like a resource. Managed it. Allocated it where it gave her leverage. That meant this wasn't an accident. It was a system, and systems can be dismantled without ever raising your voice. I didn't announce anything. I didn't threaten change or demand explanations. I just started removing myself in places she assumed were permanent. It happened quietly, between Christmas and New Year's, when routines feel soft and people stop paying attention. I stopped joining her on the couch at night. Disney Plus still played, the same shows looping, but I stayed in the other room with paperwork spread out, lights low, phone face down. She asked once if I was upset. I told her January deadlines were heavy. She accepted that without hesitation. The next step was practical. I rerouted deposits, separated accounts, moved automatic payments without discussion. Not as punishment, as preparation. She didn't notice. She never looked at numbers unless something went wrong, and nothing had gone wrong yet. At work, I adjusted access. The foreman kept his position but lost privileges he didn't need. Schedules tightened. Office hours changed. Nothing dramatic enough to raise suspicion, just enough to limit overlap. I watched him adapt. Watched him realize doors were closing without knowing why. At home, she tried harder. Not physically, atmospherically. More candles. Softer lighting. Bath and Body Works, scents meant to suggest warmth without requiring vulnerability. She talked about a weekend getaway after the holidays, about how things would feel normal again soon. I nodded and made no commitments. The real disappearance came in stages. I started leaving earlier, coming back later. Some mornings I didn't come back at all. I stayed at a short-term rental I'd found through Craigslist, close enough to work to be convenient, far enough to feel quiet. I didn't tell her. I didn't lie either. She assumed. Her messages changed tone within days. Questions replaced statements. Concern crept in where control used to live. She asked if everything was okay between us. I said I was focusing on work. That answer no longer satisfied her. By the first week of January, panic leaked through the cracks. She called more, texted longer, mentioned missing me. I responded politely, briefly, without emotion. Presence had been my currency for years. I'd stopped spending it. One night, I watched her through the window as I picked up the last box of my things. She stood in the living room, phone in hand, candle burning, confused by the silence she'd created and no longer controlled. She thought this was temporary. I knew better. I wasn't disappearing to hurt her. I was disappearing to see what happened when I stopped holding the structure together. I didn't confront him. That would have given him shape, a role in the story. I didn't need that. What I needed was leverage that didn't look like my hand. Every job leaves traces if you know where to look. Permits, supplier invoices, delivery windows. I went back through the last 6 months the same way I'd audit a failing project. Quietly, methodically, I noticed materials ordered twice and installed once. I noticed a pattern of last-minute changes that always benefited one crew. His crew. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together, it formed a picture. Not criminal. Careless. The kind of carelessness that comes from believing you're protected by proximity to power. I let January settle in. Cold mornings. Long days. I ate lunch alone most afternoons, sometimes in the parking lot of Sam's Club, watching families load their carts while my phone stayed silent. She stopped pretending everything was fine and started asking what she'd done wrong. I didn't answer that question. I wasn't interested in the performance of regret. At work, I tightened reporting requirements. New sign-offs. New verification steps. Changes that applied to everyone but landed hardest on him. He adjusted at first, confident, still smiling too easily when our paths crossed. Then the delays started. Missed deadlines. Incomplete paperwork. The kind of mistakes that get noticed by people above my pay grade. I didn't file complaints. I didn't accuse. I forwarded information the same way I always had, detached and factual. The system did the rest. At home, she grew restless. She stopped lighting candles. Stopped mentioning future plans. The house felt hollow when I passed through to collect mail or grab tools I'd left behind. Disney Plus no longer played in the background. Silence replaced it, thick and accusing. One evening she texted that she was scared, that things felt wrong. I replied that change usually does. It wasn't unkind. It was true. By the end of the month, he was pulled off-site pending review. Not fired. Just removed. Access revoked. Schedule wiped. He didn't know why. He just knew the ground had shifted. She found out before he did. Panic has a way of traveling faster than facts. Her calls came back-to-back then, voice shaking, questions tumbling over each other. I listened without interrupting, without reassuring. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was stepping back and letting gravity work. And for the first time, she realized the warmth she'd moved so casually was tied to a structure she no longer controlled. The shift became visible to other people before she was ready to admit it to herself. That's how these things usually happen. Control disappears quietly at home, but socially it collapses in daylight. It started at the office. Her authority had always been informal, built on access rather than title. People deferred to her because she was close to me, because proximity looked like power. Once I stepped back, that illusion thinned fast. Meetings moved without her. Decisions bypassed her desk. She noticed because silence replaced the constant pings that used to define her day. At home, the isolation deepened. She tried to fill it with motion, reorganizing rooms that no longer felt lived in, lighting candles she let burn down unattended. The Bath and Body Works scents didn't linger the way they used to. Nothing did. When I stopped by to collect a few remaining tools, she hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to speak. I nodded, neutral, and left. That nod landed harder than any argument ever had. The real moment came at a small family gathering she insisted we still attend together. I agreed without enthusiasm. I arrived late, stayed near the edge of the room, spoke when spoken to. She watched me from across the space, waiting for cues that never came. People noticed. Someone asked if everything was okay. Not me. Her. She laughed it off at first. Then the laughter faltered. She realized she couldn't borrow my steadiness anymore. Whatever story she'd been telling herself about temporary distance didn't hold up under other people's eyes. Later that night, she sat on the couch alone while Disney Plus played to an empty room. She texted me from 10 feet away, asking if we could talk. I replied that it wasn't a good time. That answer used to belong to her. Over the next few days, the calls from her friends slowed. Invitations stopped. People don't like uncertainty, and she'd become unpredictable without the anchor she once relied on. She told me she felt invisible. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. At work, her name stopped coming up altogether. The company adjusted without drama, without announcement. Systems don't mourn individuals. They adapt. She tried once more to pull me back into the center, to reestablish the dynamic where she set the temperature and I adjusted. I didn't resist. I simply wasn't there. And that absence, steady and unexplained, did more damage to her sense of control than any confrontation ever could. By February, Her world had narrowed to the space between questions and unanswered calls. The people she used to lean on had pulled back, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. Uncertainty makes everyone cautious. She could feel it in pauses, in delayed replies, in conversations that ended sooner than expected. She tried to anchor herself in routine. Grocery runs, cleaning, small projects around the house that used to feel shared. Once, I passed her at Sam's Club by accident, both of us reaching for the same aisle from opposite ends. She froze when she saw me, like she hadn't prepared for that version of reality. I nodded, polite, distant, and kept walking. I didn't circle back. I didn't check if she was okay. She stood there longer than necessary, pretending to read labels. At night, the house stayed dark. No candles. No background noise. Disney Plus had been paused for so long the screen asked if anyone was still watching. She was. Just not the way it meant. She reached out more directly then. Not with anger. With uncertainty. She said she didn't understand when things had shifted so far. She said she felt alone, even in rooms full of people. I read the messages carefully and answered less than she wanted, more than she deserved. Neutrality is confusing when someone is used to control. From my side, the distance felt clean. I slept better, woke earlier, drove to work before the sun came up, the car cutting through cold air without urgency. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't available. She asked once if I still cared. The question came late. After weeks of silence, she couldn't fill. I told her care wasn't the same as access. That was the closest thing to an explanation she got. At work, she tried to insert herself again, showing up without purpose, asking about schedules that no longer involved her. People were polite but unmoved. Systems don't reopen once they've adjusted. One evening, she stood in the driveway as I loaded a few things into the car, watching like she expected me to turn back. I didn't rush. I didn't linger. I acknowledged her presence without inviting conversation. That restraint unsettled her more than anger ever had. She was used to setting the temperature. Warm or cold. Permission or denial. Now she was standing in a season she couldn't influence, watching someone she thought she knew move through it without her. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't a phase. It was a new climate. The confrontation didn't happen the way she'd probably rehearsed it. There was no dramatic timing, no raised voices, no audience. It happened on a weekday evening, ordinary enough to feel safe. That's usually when people try to regain control. She asked me to come by the house. Said she needed clarity. I agreed, not because I owed her answers, but because distance doesn't mean avoidance. It means choosing when to stand still. When I walked in, the place felt staged, clean in a way that lacked warmth. A single candle burned on the counter, one of those Bath and Body Works scents she used to rely on when words failed. It didn't work anymore. The air stayed cold. She talked first, too fast, about misunderstandings, about stress, about how the holidays had been hard and how she hadn't meant for things to spiral. She said she felt like she was losing me and didn't know how it happened. I listened without correcting the timeline. People need their version intact before they can face reality. She asked if there was someone else. That question caught in her throat. I told her no. The answer unsettled her more than a confession would have. There was no rival to blame. No external force to fight. Then she asked if I was leaving for good. I didn't answer right away. Silence is honest when words would be performative. I looked around the room she'd tried to warm back to life. The couch where we'd stopped sitting together. The screen where Disney Plus had once filled space we refused to occupy. I told her I'd stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. That I hadn't disappeared. I just removed myself from a dynamic that required me to shrink so someone else could feel in control. She cried then. Not loudly. Not theatrically. The kind of quiet collapse that comes when leverage fails. She reached for me out of instinct, not intimacy, and stopped when she realized I hadn't moved. She asked what she could do. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because she asked, but because I realized I didn't feel pulled by the question. I told her I wasn't here to negotiate closeness. That whatever happened next would happen slowly, or not at all. I stood to leave. She followed me to the door, searching my face for permission, reassurance, something familiar. I gave her none. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. And when I walked away, I knew this wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about whether she could exist without controlling the temperature of the room, and whether I would ever step back inside on anyone else's terms. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one smaller than the last, until there was nothing left to brace against. After that night, she unraveled quietly. No public scenes, no dramatic messages, just a steady loss of footing. She stopped going into the office altogether. There was no role left for her there, no informal authority to lean on. People moved forward without checking in. Schedules filled without her input. The system she'd once managed adjusted and forgot. At home, time stretched. Days blurred together. She tried to reclaim routines, but without purpose they felt hollow. She lit candles again, then let them burn out. She turned Disney Plus back on, scrolling endlessly without pressing play, as if noise alone could substitute for presence. It didn't. The man she'd shifted her warmth toward disappeared faster than she expected. Once his access vanished, so did his confidence. He stopped calling, stopped answering. Whatever they'd built in proximity couldn't survive exposure. Convenience doesn't age well under pressure. That's when the memories started hitting her. Not the big moments. The small ones she'd dismissed. Me fixing things without being asked. Me showing up early, staying late. Me making space for her moods without requiring explanation. At the time, it had felt stable, predictable. Now it echoed. She told me later that the quiet was the worst part. Not loneliness. Absence. The realization that the house wasn't empty because I'd left, but because she'd pushed the warmth somewhere else and assumed it would always be there when she wanted it back. I watched all of this from a distance that felt intentional. I didn't rush to fill gaps that weren't mine anymore. I didn't explain myself to people who hadn't lived inside the silence. I focused on work, on mornings that started early and ended clean. The car felt like a boundary I could close behind me. She reached out less as the weeks passed. Not because she didn't care, but because she was running out of ways to frame what had happened without facing it directly. Control had been her language. Without it, she struggled to speak. By late winter, the collapse settled into something heavier than panic. Acceptance, without relief. She understood then that what she'd lost wasn't a man who left in anger. It was a structure that had quietly held her life together. And it wasn't coming back just because she finally felt the cold. Spring came without ceremony. No dramatic thaw. Just longer light in the mornings and a sense that something had settled into place. I didn't rush back. I didn't test the ground to see if it would hold. I let time do what it does best when no one interferes. Work stayed steady. Mornings started early, ended clean. I drove without urgency, the car carrying me forward without pulling me back. She reached out once, carefully, as if she understood that anything louder might break what little connection remained. She asked if we could talk again. Not to argue, not to explain, just to be honest. I agreed, but only on my terms. We met at the house one last time. It looked different in daylight. Less like a place that waited. More like a place that remembered. She didn't try to stage it this time. No candles. No background noise. The quiet stayed honest. She spoke slowly. Not defensively. She admitted she'd used distance as leverage, that she'd assumed I would always be there to absorb it. She said the holidays had shown her how easily she'd reassigned warmth without considering the cost. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She asked if there was any way forward. I told her there could be, but not the way it was before. That access wouldn't be automatic anymore. That closeness would have to be mutual, visible, and earned over time. That I wouldn't compete for space in my own life again. She nodded, not relieved, but clear. Clarity changes people. Sometimes too late. Sometimes just in time. I told her I wasn't staying that night. Or the next. That whatever came next would move slowly, or not at all. She didn't argue. She didn't reach for me. She let the distance exist without trying to control it. As I left, I noticed a printed notice on the counter from Craigslist, something she'd found while searching for ways to fill empty rooms. It struck me how quiet reinvention looks from the outside. At the door, she asked if I'd disappeared on purpose. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She stood there as I walked away, understanding finally that winter hadn't ended because spring arrived. It ended because I'd stopped providing the warmth. And if there was ever going to be another season between us, it would happen on different terms. Not because she asked, because I chose. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.